on earth that can remove the Palestinian people from our ancestral homeland, including Gaza. These are the tall orders before us. We will work with you very closely, Mr. Secretary General, for these objectives that are rooted in General Assembly and Security Council resolutions, rooted in international law, and we want peace based on international law and relevant UN resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. This is what the Arab countries want. This is what the Islamic countries want. This is what the great majority of member states at the United Nations want. We need to see implementation of these resolutions, not reiteration of the principles in them. We will work very closely with you, with the committee, with the leadership of the committee, and all those who are ready and willing to work for peace based on justice, regardless of their location, regardless of their size, their might, or their weakness. We are interested in peace. We are interested in learning the lessons of what existed before the 7th of October. We need to put an end to this tragedy, and the way to do it is to have peace, and there is no plan B, as you always often say, to the two-state solution. We want to make it reality, and we want to make it as soon as possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Thank you, Minister Riyad Mansour. We shall now suspend the meeting for a few minutes to allow the Secretary General to leave. Thank you very much.
So now we are back to our...
Yes.
Go back to...
Turning now to item 5, we would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm our unwavering support for UNRWA, particularly at this critical moment when its mandate and continued operations in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, are under threat.
Ambassador Mansour is going to join us. Maybe just give me a few minutes.
Goodness, he's here.
And then the
Thank you very much. In order to show our strong support to UNRWA, I now have the distinct honor of giving the floor to Mrs. Greta Gunnarsdottir, head of UNRWA Liaison Office in New York, who will read a statement by UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to convey warm regards to you from the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, and thank the committee for inviting UNRWA to speak at your meeting here today. I would also like to congratulate the Chair and the Bureau on your election. I'm delivering the statement on behalf of the Commissioner General, who regrets that he could not be here in person. Excellencies, the Israeli Knesset legislation prohibiting UNRWA's operations in, and I quote, sovereign territory of the State of Israel, unquote, and forbidding contact between Israeli officials and UNRWA representatives entered into force last week. The legislation, which contravenes international law and has been condemned by most UN member states, creates significant operational challenges for the agency. The limitation of visas for international UNRWA staff in occupied East Jerusalem has effectively expelled them. The United Nations has underlined to Israeli authorities that UNRWA's compound in Sheikh Jarrah, which the agency was compelled to evacuate after decades of use, remains a UN building protected by privileges and immunities under international law. Our local staff are continuing to work wherever possible across the occupied West Bank. However, they do so at a considerable personal risk in an increasingly hostile operational environment. Thanks to them, UNRWA schools and health clinics remain open, providing essential services to Palestinian refugees. This week, attendance at our schools has been above 85%, and hundreds of people have sought treatment at our health centers. Our operations in Gaza are also continuing, and a core team of international staff is present. It is unclear how our ability to operate will be constrained by the recently imposed prohibition on contact between UNRWA representatives and Israeli officials. What is clear is that UNRWA remains firmly committed to staying and delivering its mandate from the General Assembly until it is no longer possible to do so. Excellencies, while the ceasefire in Gaza brings hope, the situation on the ground is dire and humanitarian needs are immense. UNRWA is critical to the success of the ceasefire. The agency constitutes half of the emergency response, with all other UN entities and NGOs delivering the other half. Since October 2023, we have delivered 2/3 of all food assistance, providing shelter to over 1 million displaced persons, and vaccinated 250,000 children against polio. Since the ceasefire began, UNRWA has distributed food to more than 750,000 people. We conduct some 17,000 medical consultations every day and have expanded our health services, including in Gaza City and in the north of Gaza. The resumption of education for hundreds of thousands of children remains a priority. Children in Gaza have already lost 2 years of learning. In January alone, more than 260,000 children, half of them girls, enrolled in our online learning platform. Absent a fully fledged state, only UNRWA has the capacity to bring the children back to learning. Curtailing our operations now, when the needs are so high and trust in the international community is so low, will undermine the ceasefire. It will sabotage Gaza's recovery and political transition. In the occupied West Bank, violence is surging. Large parts of Jenin camp have been destroyed in controlled detonations by the Israeli security forces. Depriving Palestinian refugees in the occupied West Bank of UNRWA education and healthcare services will only deepen their vulnerability. Across the occupied Palestinian territory, undermining the agency's work will harm the lives and future of millions of Palestinian refugees. Excellencies, the Knesset legislation is part of a relentless campaign to dismantle UNRWA. The government of Israel is investing significant resources to portray the agency as a terrorist organization and our staff as terrorists or terrorist sympathizers. Billboards and ads accusing UNRWA of terrorism were displaced in major cities around the world, including here in New York. They were paid for by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Google ad campaigns redirect those seeking information about the agency to websites replete with disinformation. The absurdity of anti-UNRWA propaganda does not diminish the threat it poses to our staff, especially those in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, where 273 of our colleagues have been killed. It sets a precedent for governments to accuse a United Nations entity of terrorism as a pretext to clamp down on human rights. It sets a precedent for criminalizing humanitarian assistance and protection. The political attacks against the agency are motivated by the desire to strip Palestine refugees of their refugee status, thereby unilaterally changing the long-established parameters for a political solution. The objective is to erase the history and identity of the Palestinians and deny them the right to self-determination, the very right that is at the heart of the mandate of this committee. To be clear, the rights of Palestine refugees to protection and assistance are not derived from UNRWA's mandate. They exist independently of the agency. If UNRWA ceases to protect and assist Palestine refugees, their rights will not only remain, but there will be much greater emphasis on the right to return or to be resettled, for which UNRWA has no mandate. The threat posed by political efforts to dismantle UNRWA is compounded by financial challenges, with key donors deciding to end or reduce their contributions to the agency. I am therefore appealing for an urgent increase in financial support, the early disbursement of allocated funds, and a review of funding currently on hold. Excellencies, a ceasefire in Gaza must be followed by a political transition that includes an orderly conclusion of UNRWA's mandate. Only a political pathway can ensure the protection and welfare of Palestine refugees and peace and stability in the region and beyond. A clear choice lies before us. We can allow UNRWA to implode due to the Knesset legislation and the suspension of funding by key donors. The impact on the rights and welfare of Palestine refugees will be catastrophic. Alternatively, we can allow the agency to progressively conclude its mandate within the framework of a political process and hand over its public-like services to empowered and prepared Palestinian institutions. To maximize UNRWA's value in support of the ceasefire and any subsequent political transition, I appeal for the support of the international community on 3 actions. First, push back against the implementation of the Knesset legislation. UNRWA's personnel and services are integral to the success of the ceasefire. Preserving the agency's operational space is critical for upholding the rights of millions of Palestine refugees. Second, insist on a genuine political path forward that delineates UNRWA's role as a provider of education and healthcare. The agency is essential for ensuring a viable political transition. Finally, ensure that the financial crisis does not abruptly end UNRWA's life-saving work. The agency cannot continue to operate in the face of extraordinary challenges without adequate resources. For 75 years, UNRWA has been a stabilizing force and a committed partner for peace in the occupied Palestinian territory. It must be allowed to remain so until a political solution is at hand. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The committee thanks Mrs. Gunnar Stodir for delivering Commissioner General Lazarani's statement. We understand the circumstances preventing his attendance today, but we look forward to welcoming UNRWA at a future committee meeting. Thank you very much. Before we proceed with the agenda, allow me on behalf of the committee to welcome the following delegate who has recently taken up their new post here in New York. His Excellency Mr. Salahuddin Noman Chowdhury, permanent representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations. On behalf of the committee, I warmly welcome you amongst its members and observers and wish you success in your work in New York. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today, turning to items 6 and 7 on the agenda, we will now hear two important briefings, after which the floor will be open for comments, questions, and statements. First, it is my pleasure to invite to speak Mr. Mikhail Fakhari, UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, who has kindly accepted our invitation to brief the committee on the critical issues surrounding food sovereignty and its fundamental role in preventing starvation and upholding human rights in Palestine, including Gaza. Mr. Fakhri will join us remotely via video conference. You have the floor. You have the floor, sir.
Test. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. My apologies, Chair. There was a technical difficulty. Thank you, Chair, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. Let me begin by explaining from what perspective I'm coming from as the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, and then I'll get into specifics. So I recently delivered and presented my report to the General Assembly, to the Third Committee this past October on the issue of starvation with an emphasis on the Palestinian people's food sovereignty. I've been tracking the war in Gaza since it began in October 2023 because Israel announced its intent to starve the civilians of Gaza on October 9th. I appeared before the General Assembly on October 20th, 2023, and I, among several of my colleagues, other mandate holders, were the first to raise the alarm of the risk of genocide in Gaza within the whole UN system. And me, amongst other colleagues, we've been tracking what's been going on a daily basis for the past 14, 15 months. And so what I'm presenting to you is coming from my report, from my work, from my direct interaction with people in Gaza, with a wide range of stakeholders and governments. And what I think what's important to think about when it comes to the ceasefire, I want to build on Ambassador Mansour's point and a colleague from UNRWA, and say, re-emphasize the importance of the ceasefire. But politically, I don't think this is, it's important to understand, it's not a ceasefire. Israel is treating this as a slowing down of its genocide and starvation campaign. Because let's remember, on October 6th, 2023, Gaza had been under a blockade for 23 years, and that 50% of civilians in Gaza on October 6th, 2023, were already food insecure, and 80% depended on humanitarian aid. So the report that I delivered to the General Assembly, I answered the question, how was it even possible for the state of Israel to starve 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza so quickly and so completely. This has been the fastest starvation campaign in modern history. And to answer that question, I had to go back to the beginning of the creation of the State of Israel. If you look at the founding document of UNRWA, one of the purposes and reasons UNRWA was created was, this is direct language, to prevent the starvation of the Palestinian people. This is 1948. So yes, the ceasefire is important. And yes, recovery and reconstruction is important. But we have to think about how can the people in Gaza, but Palestine more broadly, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Palestinians in the State of Israel. In Palestine, there has always been the risk of starvation. So if there's any talk of reconstruction, must think about how can the Palestinian people no longer face the risk of starvation and the risk of genocide. The International Court of Justice has recognized the risk of genocide and recognized that starvation is happening. The International Criminal Court has issued warrants on the crime of starvation against Netanyahu and former Minister Gallant. So this is what's important, is to go back and make sure that people no longer face this risk. This goes to the core then of what are the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. I just want to emphasize before, and I appreciate the discussion on the importance of a two-state solution, but can we imagine two states being created? And, you know, if finally the state of Palestine is well recognized and established, but nevertheless, the state of Palestine will still be next to the state of Israel, which created the conditions of starvation and genocide. So before we talk one state, two state, whatever state solution, going back to the mandate of this committee, what are the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people? First and foremost, the right of return. To re-emphasize what was said by our colleague from UNRWA. The reports from this committee, I strongly recommend, put front and center the right of return and the right of self-determination. That will provide the conditions necessary for all the political negotiations and political solutions going forward. Too often in UN spaces, do people forget the right of return and the right of self-determination. In the last few minutes, I'll talk about what's at stake. So of course, what's at stake are the Palestinian people's rights. But what we've seen is Israel has not just been attacking Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and within Israel itself at degrees of violence we've never seen, destroying food systems, creating conditions of hunger that are going to last for generations. But Israel has attacked the UN itself. It has shot at peacekeepers in Lebanon. Israel has killed a record number of UN staff in Gaza, most of them UNRWA staff. We've never seen so many humanitarian workers killed. The human rights system has been under attack by Israel. The mandate holders, we've all been attacked, those of us that have focused on Gaza and on Palestine. And Israel declared the Secretary General himself persona non grata several months ago. And what I heard ambassadors say in New York when I met with them in October in a group meeting on the issue, several ambassadors said when Israel attacks the UN, it's attacking everyone. And now we're seeing what else is at stake, and this was always true for the last 15 months, is US power and European unity. Without the support of the United States and Germany, amongst others, Israel would not be able to implement its starvation campaign and commit genocide. And now what we're seeing is the United States, under the previous administration, exited international law. They stopped using the language of international law in ways we've never seen. And now we're seeing the US administration not only exit international law, but exit the UN, defunding UNRWA, threatening to defund UNESCO, exiting the Human Rights Council. So what's at stake is the international legal order and the UN itself. So the tools and the mechanisms and the policies that we develop to support the Palestinian people's liberation from occupation, the right to return and the right to self-determination, will be the same tools that we will need to rebuild international law and the UN system that we need. The last point I want to make is that I want to commend the different governments that have created what's called the Hague Group. This is, of course, Senegal, as the chair will know. This is called, the Hague Group is Belize, Bolivia, Colombia, Cuba, Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, Senegal, and South Africa. This group was created in The Hague by the governments to reaffirm their commitment to implement the ICJ resolutions and the ICC decisions. And the first thing on their agenda, of course, was the International Court of Justice decision finding Israel's occupation illegal. And, of course, we're talking about the General Assembly resolution implementing this. So these are countries, and I invite other countries to join this group, that are committed to implementing international law as we know it. So what's at stake is, of course, Palestine, but the global order itself is at stake. And I put forward my services as the Special Rapporteur on the right to food. I've been following this issue closely, not only in New York, I'm active in Geneva, and I'm active in Rome with the Rome-based agencies focused on food and agriculture. And I know I have many colleagues that were eager and willing to work with the committee and with the General Assembly to push all these points forward. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our conversation.
I thank Mr. Fakhri for his important briefing and commend the Special Rapporteur for his important work, including his latest report highlighting this fundamental right. Thank you very much. I now have the pleasure to invite to the podium Mr. Hani Al-Madoun, Senior Director of Philanthropy at UNRWA USA, who has taken the time to be with us and will deliver a briefing on the situation in Gaza from the vantage point of the Palestinian population there, and especially on the issue of humanitarian aid during the war. You have the floor, sir.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, and esteemed colleagues, I stand before you today as an American advocate for the Palestinian people and for the humanitarian mission of the United Nations. And I am also here as a grieving brother. Much of my family in north of Gaza, and over the past 16 months, I've been one of the millions of Palestinians around the world who day after day have received news of our families and neighbors experiencing unjustifiable losses and indignities. My world shattered for the first time in November 24, 2023, when Israel dropped a bomb on the family home where my brother lived, killing him, his wife Safa, their 4 beautiful children, and even their beloved cat, Lucky. The house was gone in an instant, reduced to rubble. For a week, my mother stood guard over the lifeless bodies of Majid, Safa, and their children. She was grieving, but at the same time, she had to shield them from the stray and starving dogs. Can you imagine that? Took a full week to retrieve their remains. My family and neighbors had to bury Safa twice because only half of her body could be recovered in the first day. The rest they dug up by hand. And if this wasn't enough to process, my world shattered again. A few days later, when footage emerged from North Gaza, Palestinian men being paraded by the Israeli army in their underwear as if they were part of some grotesque spectacle. I looked closely, and there he was, my other brother Mahmoud, humiliated and falsely accused of being a fighter. He's not. He has never been. He's not even physically fit enough to run for more than 10 minutes. When some courageous journalists started asking questions about the footage, the lies fell apart, and they released my brother, barefoot, in his boxers, and left far from his home with nothing but the indignity they had forced upon him. My world continued to shatter 2 weeks later. I picked up my phone and I saw a video of my sister Samah trying to bake bread using animal feed. My family had run out of flour and pasta, and the only option left was rabbit food. She told me it smelled so unbearable that even their cat refused to eat it. This was devastating for me to hear, not only as her brother, but because I am the Senior Director of Philanthropy at UNRWA USA, which is an American not-for-profit that supports the amazing and critical work of UNRWA, the UN agency. See, individual efforts, no matter how heartfelt, cannot replace the comprehensive support that established institutions like UNRWA provide. UNRWA's role in delivering essential wide-scale services, education, healthcare, and humanitarian aid is indispensable to the well-being of the Palestinian refugees. The thing about the humanitarian work, though, is that people will find a way to keep at it. I hear the news of this every day in my work. UNRWA staff across the occupied Palestinian territories continue to find ways to help as many people as they can, even with very little. And I saw it in my third brother's devotion to caring for the people. In February 2024, right around Valentine's Day, amid my family's suffering, my brother Mahmoud and I managed to co-found the Gaza Soup Kitchen in Beit Lahia in North Gaza. It started with Mahmoud cooking over a simple open fire place, and soon it became a lifeline, serving hot meals to thousands of families every day and helping to avert more victims of the famine Israel has imposed on our people in Gaza. I'm here to tell you the famine in Israel. We've served food for people at the Kamal Adwan Hospital at the malnourished division. But Chef Mahmoud's vision was never just about food. By late summer of last year, he had also set up a medical clinic that was treating up to 75 patients. When the hospitals were placed under siege, small clinics like that were life-saving. He would provide things like baby formula and diapers. By the fall, he had founded a small school to provide lessons to 560 children. In fact, in the school, he put a sign in Hebrew that read, "Please do not bomb," and he put the American flag. Many others in Gaza have launched similar efforts over the months. And so many people over the world have helped keep this work going, including many from the United States. Many families like mine who had already been displaced 10 times before the brutal assault have never once considered leaving Gaza. This is important because as devastating as these 16 months have been, this is not a new story. Our elders who survived the 1948 Nakba taught us that historically Palestinians who leave homes are never allowed to return. And whenever the world failed the Palestinian people, when food was denied, when resources were blocked, the land did not. It gave them wild greens, porcelain, and mallow, Swiss chard to survive on. It held them when no one in the world would. That's why forcing Palestinians out of Gaza is as unrealistic as draining the ocean. Real progress lies in the pursuit of justice and freedom of our people, of economic development and stability, and of a genuine and lasting peace. But in the meantime, Gaza endures, not just through struggle, but through resilience, through the unbreakable bond between its people and its earth. I wish I could tell you my world stopped shattering, but it happened again. This past November, Mahmoud, my dear brother, and North Gaza's beloved chef, was targeted and killed by an Israeli strike. When it happened, Mahmoud was just 30 yards from the shelter where his 7 children awaited his return. His youngest, just weeks old. His death was not an accident. It was a deliberate act meant to silence anyone who stands in the way of Gaza's erasure. Mahmoud was not a fighter. He's a father. He was a father, a humanitarian, and a man devoted to his community. His only crime was his unwavering commitment to organizing humanitarian aid, delivering meals, and sustaining those around him. Last week in North Gaza, my family set out with heavy hearts to move Chef Mahmoud to the town's cemetery, as he had been placed in a makeshift grave. We wanted to put him near our 3 siblings, but when the family arrived, they found devastation. Israeli tanks had erased the graves, leaving only rubble and uncertainty. We could not find our loved ones' resting places. We could not lay Mahmoud beside them as we had planned. The trauma to my family at this moment is indescribable. Yet even in this heartbreak, my only surviving brother, Muhammad, may have found a grave for our brother Mahmoud. He is now moving my brother carefully, wrapping him in a new shroud. May his memory be eternal. Like thousands of families in Gaza, we may no longer have graves to visit, but we hold on to one truth: our loved ones are with their Creator. This personal tragedy is but a reflection of the broader suffering endured by countless Palestinian families. The relentless assault and deliberate starvation and the systematic attempt to force displacement are not isolated incidents, but part of a broader strategy by this illegal occupation that strikes at the heart of our existence. In the face of such adversity, we remain steadfast. We continue finding ways to support one another and to draw strength from the land and from the support and loving people around the world, many of whom are in this room. That's why, in these trying times, leaders must reaffirm a collective commitment to upholding the rights of the dignity of the Palestinian people, and must ensure that UNRWA continue its work as mandated by the United Nations. This is not merely an act of charity, but a reinforcement of our shared values and dedication to justice, and if it's important to you, national interest. To date, my colleagues and I at UNRWA USA have coordinated delivering tens of millions in grassroots donations to sustain UNRWA's education, healthcare, and food assistance for millions of refugees. It warmed our hearts to see individual donors came from across the United States and more than 80 countries to support our work, including from within Israel, and from diverse places of worship like synagogues, churches, mosques, and even concert halls. What's more, so many countries represented here today have long extended support to the Palestinian people and continue to do so in these darkest of times. And now, we need to be able to continue raising and delivering these crucial funds. It will require an immense amount of work, assistance, and funding to rebuild Gaza, and to even begin to help Palestine refugees take back their dignity yet again. And Palestinians will rebuild. I thank the community on the exercise of the unalienable rights for the Palestinian people for inviting me to share my story today from both my Palestinian community and my American one. And I thank the committee for all the work it has been doing for so many years, and for the moral clarity, and for until the realization of justice, freedom, dignity, and peace for all our people. Thank you, esteemed colleagues. I leave you with what dear Chef Mahmoud used to say whenever he closes the videos in Arabic. He used to say, "Mustamirreen," which means we will continue. Thank you so much.
I thank Mr. Al-Madoun for his briefing. The committee reaffirms its support for your organization and the many Palestinians in Gaza who self-organized during the war and its aftermath to provide humanitarian aid initiatives like the Gaza Soup Kitchen. We extend our deepest condolences to the families of all humanitarian workers UNRWA staff and CSO, NGO staff personnel, and other Palestinian aid workers who have lost their lives in service, feeding and supporting Gaza's besieged, starved, and deprived Gaza population. I would like now to open the floor for statement. In view of the full agenda today, I would ask Excellencies to be as brief as possible. I recognize. Yes. Yes. Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I congratulate you and other colleagues who are elected to the Bureau. I wish all of us a success in the coming period because a challenging time is ahead of us. Today's meeting takes place at a pivotal moment. We firmly reject any efforts to forcibly displace or relocate Palestinians from Gaza and annexation of any Palestinian territory. Any forcible transfer of Palestinians from Gaza or other occupied Palestinian territories is prohibited and would constitute a serious violation of international law. Turkish Foreign Minister made it clear that displacement plan is unacceptable, and even opening this up for discussion is unacceptable. We reject all initiatives that seek to exclude the people of Gaza from the equation. After 15 months of unrelenting suffering, the realization of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people is more urgent than ever. Consequently, the work of this committee remains as crucial as ever. Excellencies, to be brief, I renew our commitment also to the work of UNRWA in general and flow of humanitarian assistance to Gaza and Palestine in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indonesia, you have the floor. Dear Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and allow me to first of all extend my warmest congratulations to you on your appointment. I also thank the UN Secretary General for his unwavering commitment, as well as all briefers for their invaluable and sobering insights. Mr. Chair, the ceasefire offers a brief respite after 50 months of relentless bombardment in Gaza. However, a ceasefire alone is not enough. The challenges ahead remain enormous, and in this regard, Indonesia strongly rejects any attempt to forcibly displace Palestinians or alter the demographic composition of the occupied Palestinian territory. We reaffirm that the only viable path to lasting peace in the region is by addressing the root cause, namely illegal Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory. We are also concerned that as we speak, Israeli aggression in the West Bank is escalating, perpetuating the cycle of conflict. For this reason, a ceasefire must also break the cycle of violence the Palestinian people have endured far too much, far too long. The committee has a duty to end their suffering by upholding their inalienable rights to self-determination, independence, and their right to return. Mr. Chair, as we embark on the committee's work for 2025, allow me to highlight three key points. First, we must focus on full implementation of relevant UN resolutions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Various UN Security Council resolutions, ICJ provisional measures, advisory opinions, and GA resolutions reflect a global legal and political consensus on resolving this conflict. Their implementation is crucial in advancing a just and lasting solution. To achieve this, our program of work must connect and align and contribute to all ongoing initiatives, which include the AOI-CJ proceedings on Israel's obligation towards the UN, the fourth Geneva Convention Conference, and the high-level International Conference on Two-State Solution in June 2025. These efforts must ultimately lead to ending the illegal occupation and uphold Palestinian rights. Second, we must continue safeguarding and advocating for the full implementation of UNRWA's mandate. UNRWA remains indispensable, not only in delivering humanitarian aid, but also in protecting the rights of Palestinian refugees, a fundamental pillar of any lasting peace. Therefore, its role is central to the work of this committee. The recent Knesset legislation aimed at weakening UNRWA must be unequivocally condemned. We must take decisive action to counter this effort and safeguard the agency's ability to fulfill the mandate. Third, this committee must play a pivotal role in sustaining international engagement and solidarity with the Palestinian people and to safeguard the two-state solution. We will strengthen our collaboration with stakeholders, regional groups, and key partners to amplify Palestinian voices, mobilize political will, and push back against efforts that obstruct their fundamental rights. Indonesia remains resolute in our commitment and will continue working with the committee to uphold the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Tunisia, you have the floor.
شكرا السيد رئيس. سعادة السفير كوليسيك، نرحب بانتخابكم رئيسا للجنة الأمم المتحدة المعنية بممارسة الشعب الفلسطيني لحقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف. نعرب لكم عن دعمنا لعمل اللجنة في الدفاع عن حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق. لأن تثمن تونس التوصل إلى اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار، فإنها تؤكد على أن هذا الاتفاق لا يجب أن يحجب عنا وعلى المجموعة الدولية مسؤولية مواصلة ملاحقة مسؤولي الاحتلال لمحاسبتهم على جرائم الإبادة الجماعية الذين يرتكبوها على الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق في غزة وفي الضفة الغربية. تؤكد بلادي على دعمها العمل الحيوي الذي تلعبه الأونروا، وتجدد دعمها الثابت لصمود الشعب الفلسطيني في هذه المرحلة الفارقة من مسيرة نضاله من أجل استرداد جميع حقوقه المشروعة غير القابلة للتصرف، والتي لن تسقط بالتقادم، وفي مقدمتها حقه في تقرير المصير وإقامة دولته المستقلة ذات السيادة على كل أرض فلسطين وعاصمتها القدس الشريف. وشكرا لكم سعادة السفير.
Thank you very much. Venezuela, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Permítame primeramente extenderle nuestras felicitaciones por su reelección y desearle el mejor de los éxitos en tan importante responsabilidad, más aún teniendo en cuenta el papel central que este comité está llamado a desempeñar en medio de la actual coyuntura. En ese mismo orden, felicitamos también a los embajadores de Cuba, Indonesia, Nicaragua, Namibia y Malasia por su reelección como miembros del Buró. Deseamos, como siempre, el mejor de los éxitos a este comité en el desempeño de sus funciones, incluyendo en lo relativo a la implementación del programa de trabajo que estamos próximos a aprobar para este año, una tarea en la cual puede contar con el pleno respaldo y todo el apoyo de nuestra delegación. Agradecemos, por otra parte, la actualización brindada por el embajador Mansur en relación a los últimos desarrollos en el territorio palestino ocupado y la imperiosa e impostergable necesidad de preservar tanto la dignidad del noble pueblo palestino como un horizonte político que nos permita, sin más demoras, alcanzar una solución integral, justa y duradera a la cuestión de Palestina. Agradecemos igualmente las valiosas presentaciones de la representante del UNRWA, a quien reiteramos todo nuestro respaldo moral, ético y político, así como del relator Fakiri y del señor Almadún. Señor presidente, la cuestión de Palestina es uno de los temas de política exterior a los cuales mi país otorga mayor importancia. En ese contexto, permítanos iniciar nuestra intervención ratificando nuestro firme compromiso con esta justa causa, así como nuestra inquebrantable solidaridad con el hermano pueblo palestino, que no se cansa ni se cansará jamás de luchar por la realización de sus legítimas aspiraciones nacionales, incluyendo a partir del ejercicio pleno de sus derechos inalienables, como el de la autodeterminación, en su Estado de Palestina libre, independiente y soberano, con Jerusalén Oriental como su capital y en las fronteras previas a 1967. La situación sobre el terreno es realmente grave desde todo punto de vista, sea desde una perspectiva de seguridad, de desarrollo, de derechos humanos o humanitaria, a lo que se suman los incesantes esfuerzos por desmantelar y desfinanciar un organismo vital para la supervivencia de millones, como lo es precisamente el UNRWA. Y si bien parecería que la situación en Gaza viene mejorando, a partir del inicio del cese al fuego acordado por las partes hace poco más de 2 semanas, la realidad es que mientras existe una frágil percepción de avances en la franja de Gaza, la situación se complejiza en otros lugares del territorio palestino ocupado. Así las cosas, debemos enfatizar que el acuerdo del cese al fuego, del cual mi país ha dado la bienvenida y respecto del cual se supone próximamente se inicie una segunda fase de negociaciones, podría verse afectado en razón de los últimos desarrollos en la ribera occidental y la puesta en marcha de la llamada Operación Muro de Hierro por parte de las fuerzas de ocupación israelíes y que ha resultado, entre otros, en la destrucción de infraestructura vital y de campos de refugiados del UNRWA, sin contar el saldo de muerte y dolor que ha dejado a su paso en los últimos días. Señor presidente, la República Bolivariana de Venezuela considera que a la luz de todo lo anterior y conscientes del contexto geopolítico actual, marcado, entre otros, por un conjunto de declaraciones verdaderamente preocupantes por parte del gobierno de los Estados Unidos de América, que atentan no solo contra los derechos inalienables del pueblo palestino, sino contra la viabilidad misma de la solución de los dos estados, y que mi país rechaza categóricamente tales declaraciones, este comité está llamado a avanzar urgentemente hacia la realización plena de su mandato, para lo cual proponemos intensificar nuestros trabajos y desde esta plataforma desempeñar un papel central y proactivo en todo lo relativo a la venidera Conferencia Internacional de Alto Nivel para el arreglo pacífico de la cuestión de Palestina y la implementación de la solución biestatal, incluyendo en el proceso preparatorio de su documento final. Concluyo reiterando el pleno respaldo de mi país a las labores de este comité y manifestando nuestra firme disposición de participar activa y constructivamente en sus labores, hasta tanto logremos que el hermano pueblo palestino pueda ejercer de manera plena y efectiva sus derechos inalienables, incluyendo a la libre determinación y al retorno a sus tierras ancestrales, y para lo cual es vital, entre otros, garantizar que el Consejo de Seguridad asuma plenamente sus responsabilidades y que ese mismo órgano corrija sin más demoras lo que es una injusticia histórica con el Estado de Palestina a través de su admisión definitiva como miembro de pleno derecho de las Naciones Unidas. Es nuestro deber avanzar y cambiar la situación imperante, especialmente en este año que conmemoramos el 80 aniversario del establecimiento de nuestra organización, para alcanzar resultados tangibles que nos permitan encaminarnos de una vez por todas hacia la resolución de lo que es sin duda alguna uno de los conflictos más dolorosos y prolongados de nuestros tiempos. Venezuela reitera su firme apoyo y el inquebrantable compromiso de su diplomacia bolivariana de paz para con la justa causa palestina que asume y asumirá siempre como propia. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Je vous remercie. Je donne la parole à Malaisie, ambassadeur.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations on your appointment, and congratulations also to all members of the Bureau of the Committee. Malaysia is honored to continue to serve in the Bureau as Vice Chair and Rapporteur as the committee commemorates its 50th anniversary this year. Chair, Malaysia welcomes the ceasefire deal. However, we are also increasingly concerned with the escalating tensions in the West Bank due to heightened operations by the occupying forces. This poses a serious threat to the fragile ceasefire in Gaza. Malaysia also condemns Israel's actions of banning the operations of UNRWA. We salute UNRWA staff who continue to perform their responsibilities even at great personal risks. We reiterate that UNRWA's functions as the backbone of humanitarian responses and provider of all essential services to the Palestinian refugees are indispensable and irreplaceable. Indeed, UNRWA's continued operations is critical to the success of the ceasefire. UNRWA must be defended. The two-state solution is the only viable and internationally recognized pathway towards ensuring sustainable peace in the region. We are appalled by talks of forcibly displacing Palestinians out of their homeland. Malaysia will continue to work closely with other members of the committee and wider member states to advocate for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the establishment of a sovereign state of Palestine. Thank you.
I thank Malaysia, and I'll give the floor to Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I congratulate you, the vice chairs and officers of the Bureau, on your election. and wish you success in carrying out your functions at this most critical time for the Palestinian people. Indeed, the work of this committee remains most crucial at this time. I also thank the Secretary General, the Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine, representatives of UNRWA and of UNRWA USA, and the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food for their briefings. Mr. Chair, we are at a crucial crossroads for the Palestinian people and for the Middle East as a whole. With the first phase of the recently agreed ceasefire taking hold, there is hope among the Palestinian people and indeed across the world, while recognizing that there is a long road ahead towards rebuilding their lives, livelihoods, and homes. The ceasefire must be a stepping stone to lasting peace. Guyana urges that the negotiations between the parties continue in good faith to progress to a permanent end to the war and the release of all hostages. We welcome the increased supply of humanitarian aid into Gaza and the start of medical evacuations, particularly for children. We, however, call for the urgent removal of administrative impediments to the full operationalization of these efforts. Mr. Chair, we are deeply concerned that while on the one hand there is a cessation of hostilities in Gaza, a new front is opening in the occupied West Bank with the ongoing Israeli military operations, particularly in Jenin, Tulkarm, and Tubas. The scenes in the occupied West Bank are all too familiar and are reminiscent of what we have seen in Gaza over the past 15 months. The increased attacks in the occupied West Bank compound the violence that Palestinians have continuously been subjected to on account of Israeli settlement practices and policies. The pattern of violent conflict between Israel and Palestine is unsustainable. Efforts toward the two-state solution must advance with urgency to achieve a permanent end to the oppression that Palestinians face. Guyana is also concerned that attacks on the occupied West Bank are escalating at a time when there is reduced capacity to respond to the humanitarian and other needs of the Palestinian people, as UNRWA is no longer authorized to operate in the area following the entry into force of the Israeli legislation. In the circumstances, we remind that Israel, as the occupying power, must uphold its obligations under international humanitarian law to ensure that the humanitarian needs of civilians throughout the occupied Palestinian territory are met. We reiterate our unwavering support for UNRWA and call for the agency to be allowed to carry out its critical functions. It is well recognized that UNRWA is the only agency with the capacity to facilitate the delivery of services to the Palestinian people at the required scale. Mr. Chair, Guyana reiterates that it was the General Assembly that created UNRWA's mandate, and therefore it is only the General Assembly that can alter or terminate that mandate. We look forward to the ICJ advisory opinion on Israel's obligations regarding the presence of UN entities in the occupied Palestinian territories, which was requested by the General Assembly. We underscore the importance of keeping the Palestinian question on the agenda of the international community and of accelerating efforts to secure a comprehensive, just, and peaceful solution of the conflict. To this end, Guyana continues to support and affirms the legitimacy of the two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders. I thank you.
I thank Guyana, and I give the floor to Cuba.
Gracias, señor presidente. Señor presidente, le traslado mis más sinceras felicitaciones por su elección al frente del comité. Igualmente, felicitamos a mis colegas de Nicaragua, Indonesia y Namibia por su elección como vicepresidentes y a Malasia como vicepresidente y relator. Agradezco a nuestro hermano el embajador Mansur y al resto de los ponentes por las presentaciones e intervenciones realizadas. Agradezco también el apoyo y la confianza depositada en nuestra elección como vicepresidente, responsabilidad que asumimos en nombre de Cuba con el más alto compromiso de continuar defendiendo la justa causa del pueblo palestino desde nuestra labor en el comité y en el ámbito de las Naciones Unidas. Señor presidente, según el Ministerio de Salud de Gaza, entre el 7 de octubre de 2023 y el 28 de enero de 2025, al menos 47.354 palestinos han muerto en ese territorio y 111.563 han resultado heridos. El panorama humanitario en los territorios palestinos necesita, como todos sabemos, una respuesta urgente y efectiva. Rechazamos la prohibición por parte de Israel de las actividades de UNRWA, lo que compromete la entrega de ayuda humanitaria y servicios básicos en Gaza. La labor de UNRWA es esencial para garantizar la llegada de asistencia humanitaria a los territorios palestinos ocupados. Prohibir la labor de UNRWA hoy significa atentar contra el presente y el futuro del pueblo palestino. Es hora de poner al fin a la injusticia y culminar con más de 7 décadas de ataques, de ocupación, de abusos y de exclusión. Se impone frenar el desplazamiento forzoso de familias enteras de la tierra a la cual pertenecen. Debe detenerse con urgencia todas las políticas y prácticas ilegales colonizadoras de Israel sobre los territorios palestinos, incluido el sistema de apartheid israelí. Condenamos las operaciones militares de Israel en Cisjordania que expanden el genocidio contra el pueblo palestino. No cejaremos en continuar apoyando una solución amplia, justa y duradera para el conflicto israelí-palestino sobre la base de una solución de 2 estados que permita a los palestinos ejercer su derecho a la libre determinación y a disponer de un Estado independiente y soberano con su capital en Jerusalén Oriental y las fronteras previas a 1967 y que garantice igualmente el derecho del retorno de los refugiados. Los gobiernos de Israel y Estados Unidos deben respetar que Gaza y el resto de los territorios palestinos pertenecen única y exclusivamente al pueblo palestino. Seguiremos abogando por el cumplimiento en sus 3 fases del acuerdo de alto al fuego en Gaza como una nueva oportunidad para poner fin de una vez y por todas al intento del exterminio de un pueblo y lograr la anhelada solución al conflicto. Cuenten con nuestro firme respaldo para seguir demandando la inmediata e incondicional admisión del Estado de Palestina como miembro pleno de derecho de las Naciones Unidas. A nuestros hermanos palestinos les ratificamos que siempre podrán contar con la invariable solidaridad de Cuba a su legítima causa. Muchas gracias.
I thank Cuba and I give the floor to Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank the briefers for their briefings that they have provided us. So, Mr. Chair, the realization of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to the right to self-determination through the establishment of the independent, contiguous Palestinian state on the borders of 4 June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital has been and continues to be a cornerstone of Egypt's policy. And against this backdrop, Egypt, with Qatar and the United States, we have exerted immense efforts to induce a ceasefire in Gaza after more than 15 months of fighting, actually of heavy bombardment by Israel against Palestinian civilians in an episode of a long series exemplifying the struggle of the Palestinian people under illegal occupation. In addition, and on the humanitarian front, Egypt has been keen to ensure the entry of humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people trapped in Gaza through the Rafah border from the Egyptian side, and our efforts continue in this domain, especially that we have passed through the first phase of the ceasefire, so we are very keen to ensure the entry of humanitarian assistance. In addition, we've also been receiving Palestinians through the Rafah border to Egypt to receive medical treatment. And this is only part of what Egypt thinks is due to the Palestinian people to assist them in their struggle. And we continue to work on this front. Of course, a cornerstone of the discussion that we're having today and also in other fora is the attack on UNRWA and its delegitimization and undermining the work that it has done for the sake of the Palestinian people for more than 70 years now. Commemorating the 50th anniversary of this committee is only a manifestation of maybe the failure of the international community to assist the Palestinian people in gaining their right to self-determination. And this is what we all should be striving for and working for, so long as we can have those fora and those venues to push and advocate for this just cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I give the floor to Nicaragua.
Muchas gracias, hermano presidente. Permítame expresar nuestras más sinceras felicitaciones a usted por su elección como presidente de nuestro comité. Sabemos muy bien que con su experiencia y conocimiento estamos absolutamente seguros de que el comité continuará en el camino por la justicia, la verdad, el respeto e implementación de los derechos inalienables del pueblo palestino. Nuestras felicitaciones también a los hermanos embajadores de Cuba, Indonesia, Malasia y Namibia por su reelección como vicepresidentes y relator de este importante comité. Para Nicaragua es un honor y orgullo continuar siendo miembro de este comité y de su buró. Nuestra convicción, solidaridad y hermandad con la causa palestina, así como nuestra determinación en seguir apoyando toda iniciativa que conlleve de una vez por todas a la liberación de Palestina, al fin de la ocupación israelí y la materialización de un Estado palestino libre, soberano, independiente, ejerciendo sus derechos inalienables a la autodeterminación, su derecho al retorno a sus territorios palestinos y a vivir en paz y seguridad, y con Jerusalén Oriental como su capital. Nuestro comité debe seguir utilizando todos los medios necesarios y disponibles para continuar denunciando los crímenes de guerra, la brutalidad, el genocidio y la deshumanización que Israel ha perpetrado contra el heroico pueblo palestino durante décadas. La causa palestina debe estar en el centro de nuestras labores. Es una deuda moral e histórica de Naciones Unidas y que hasta la fecha no ha sido capaz de resolver. Por el contrario, continúa siendo manipulada y pisoteada por Israel, la potencia ocupante, sin ningún tipo de respeto al derecho internacional humanitario y a los acuerdos contraídos con Naciones Unidas. Como comité y en conjunto con la comunidad internacional, debemos continuar exigiendo el respeto de todas las resoluciones aprobadas por Naciones Unidas, en particular las resoluciones aprobadas en la sesión especial de emergencia sobre Palestina, así como la opinión consultiva que emitió la Corte Internacional de Justicia el pasado julio 2024. Agradecemos la información brindada por nuestro hermano Riyad Mansour, ministro de Palestina, sobre los últimos acontecimientos y la gravedad de la situación en todos los territorios palestinos ocupados, la cual no acaba, por el contrario, se recrudece día a día. Nuestro agradecimiento también al señor Fakri y al señor Abmalhum por sus presentaciones, que nos demuestran con testimonios y experiencias la crueldad de este genocidio sin precedentes. Nuestra solidaridad y continuo apoyo a ustedes. Señor presidente, es necesario que en nuestro comité continuemos escuchando cada vez más las voces de los pueblos del mundo, de las organizaciones populares, sindicatos, sectores profesionales, los médicos y todo el personal humanitario que contribuyen y atestiguan las realidades, el sufrimiento y de primera mano transmiten el dolor de miles de palestinos que ya no nos acompañan en este plano terrenal. Cada día, y todos lo sabemos, son más los asesinatos de niños, niñas palestinos. En estos momentos tan turbulentos y de cambios extremos, debemos continuar ahora con mayor firmeza y rechazar las recientes declaraciones implicando cualquier intento de expulsar y desplazar a la población palestina de sus territorios, de declaraciones de anexión y de expandir los asentamientos israelitas en Palestina. Esto es un acto inmoral y condenable. El pueblo palestino es el único que puede decidir sobre su futuro y Naciones Unidas debe proteger al pueblo palestino en pleno respeto de sus derechos inalienables. Agradecemos a la señora Greta Gunnarsdottir, que siempre nos indica, nos señala, nos recuerda la importancia del trabajo del UNRWA para la existencia, para el pan diario del pueblo palestino. Tenemos que reiterar de que este comité tiene que asumir y cumplir el mandato de proteger al pueblo palestino, en particular la labor que el UNRWA realiza, que es el factor vital para la sobrevivencia y existencia del pueblo palestino. Esta imposición de Israel a Naciones Unidas de cerrar las oficinas del UNRWA en territorios palestinos, pretendiendo ejercer una soberanía que no le pertenece, no es nada más que una nueva modalidad de genocidio contra el pueblo palestino. Ya no se va a asesinar al pueblo palestino con bombas y proyectiles, sino que ahora con hambre, enfermedades y otras calamidades que van a surgir si el UNRWA no continúa su ayuda al pueblo palestino. Señor presidente, ya para terminar, siempre continuamos escuchando que hay un consenso universal para la solución de 2 estados. Nosotros vamos a seguir insistiendo de que podrán haber buenas intenciones en los países occidentales con estas declaraciones, pero aquí lo necesario es reconocimiento al Estado de Palestina. Que Palestina sea aceptada como miembro pleno, que el Consejo de Seguridad acepte la aplicación de Palestina. Ese es un paso concreto que pueden dar los países occidentales en apoyo a la solución de 2 estados. Nicaragua continuará ejerciendo en todos los espacios posibles el fin de la impunidad, de la ocupación, de la transferencia indiscriminada de armas y apoyo a Israel. La historia recordará con vergüenza y desprecio a todos aquellos y aquellas cómplices y a otros que, permaneciendo en silencio, contribuyeron al genocidio y sufrimiento del pueblo palestino. También estamos convencidos que el pueblo palestino será libre. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Nicaragua. I give the floor to Qatar, the last speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Secretary General for his thoughtful remarks, which reflect the moral authority of the UN and its long-standing commitment to the just cause of Palestine. I also commend the Chair and Vice Chairs of the committee for their dedication and hard work on behalf of our Palestinian brothers and sisters during these challenging times. Furthermore, I congratulate the newly elected Chair and Vice Chairs of the committee. I reiterate the State of Qatar's unwavering commitment to the committee's mandate and advocacy, emphasizing its crucial role in addressing the unresolved question of Palestine and the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and throughout the occupied Palestinian territory, including the West Bank and Jerusalem. The State of Qatar is pleased that its continuous and dedicated efforts, alongside those of Egypt and the United States, have successfully secured the ceasefire in Gaza and the prisoner swap agreement between Israel and Hamas. We call upon all parties to fully implement the agreement in all stages and provisions to achieving lasting calm. It is essential to maintain the ceasefire, to ensure the unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid across the Gaza Strip, removing any obstacles to the entry of support for shelter, recovery, and rehabilitation in a safe and effective manner. We affirm the importance of the international community's coordinated efforts to plan and implement a comprehensive reconstruction process in the Gaza Strip as soon as possible. This process should ensure that Palestinians remain on their land, reflecting their steadfastness, while also improving daily life for residents and addressing issues of internal displacement until reconstruction is completed. We emphasize the indispensable role of UNRWA as the backbone of humanitarian assistance for the Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza. Therefore, we caution that any prohibition of the agency's activities will lead to serious humanitarian and political consequences. I reiterate the State of Qatar's firm position in support of the legitimate rights of the brotherly Palestinian people, foremost of which is their right to establish their own independent state on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, based on the vision of the two-state solution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank you very much. Pakistan, you have the floor. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the past 15 months saw unprecedented destruction and immense human suffering inflicted upon the people of Gaza. 46,000 Palestinians' lives were lost due to Israel's brutal military assault, and the majority of them were women and children. These indiscriminate and genocidal attacks constituted blatant violations of international law, including international humanitarian law. Finally, there is some reprieve for the Gazans. A ceasefire has finally silenced the frightening sounds of tanks, drones, bombs, and aircrafts. Pakistan hopes and urges that all provisions of the ceasefire agreement be fully implemented to ensure that this cessation of hostilities becomes permanent and that Palestinian civilians are spared further suffering. Mr. President, while we welcome the recently announced ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, it must not be used as an opportunity to escalate violence in other occupied Palestinian territories. Unfortunately, we are witnessing another flurry of attacks on Palestinians, as if the Palestinian soul is not valued. Following the ceasefire in Gaza, Israel forces have significantly intensified their military operations in the West Bank now. There has been a sharp increase in military raids and settler attacks, particularly in the refugee camp of Jenin. Mr. President, the scale of devastation now mirrors the catastrophic destruction that was seen in Gaza. The UN Security Council Resolution 2334 affirms that Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, are illegal under international law. East Jerusalem remains occupied territory under multiple UN resolutions, and any attempts to alter its demographic and legal status are both unlawful and unacceptable. The same holds for the territory of Gaza. Mr. President, the ceasefire in Gaza must not serve as a pretext for Israel to intensify military aggression in the West Bank. We must swiftly halt this violence, and we must hold the occupying power accountable. And we must not let the situation escalate and repeat a Gaza 2.0 in the West Bank. Secondly, UNRWA, with its extensive network of schools, healthcare facilities, and humanitarian services, UNRWA is unmatched and indispensable in its capacity to provide life-saving assistance, the resumption of education for hundreds of thousands of children, and provision of healthcare to millions of Palestinians. It would also be crucial for the reconstruction of Gaza. UNRWA and its heroic personnel have continued to operate within the Palestinian territories in Gaza in face of directed attacks against them, in which more than 270 of their personnel have lost their lives. The viability and survival of UNRWA is being threatened by the implementation of the Knesset legislations. This legislation, banning UNRWA's activities, violates the UN Charter, international law, and the advisory opinion of ICJ of 19 July 2024. Finally, the Security Council and the broader international community must renew efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace based on a two-state solution of which both Gaza and West Bank are a part. The Palestinian people have an inalienable right to self-determination, and peace can only be realized through the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and contiguous Palestinian state along pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Any delay in pursuing a political resolution will only perpetuate violence and instability in the region. Mr. President, we stand at a defining moment in history. The world is watching. We need to fulfill our responsibility to uphold international law. The Palestinian people look to us for hope, justice, and the promise of peace. We must not fail them. The bloodshed must end, the occupation must end, and the relentless suffering of innocent Palestinians must end. I thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no other speakers who wish to take the floor. Let us move on to agenda item 8, and I give the floor to the Secretariat to briefly introduce the program.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief, as you already have the document, the draft program of work in front of you. I'll quickly run through the various sections. Section 1 outlines the mandate of the Committee and the Division of Palestinian Rights is contained in the relevant General Assembly resolutions 77/22 and 79/82. Section 2 enumerates the activities of the Committee and the Division for Palestinian Rights for 2025, and in particular, and against the backdrop of the recently announced ceasefire deal, the Committee remains committed to fostering lasting peace, Palestinian unity, and a negotiated two-state solution where Israel and Palestine coexist in peace and security. As agreed by the Bureau of the Committee, the priorities for 2025 will be centered around four main aspects of the mandate. The first one being the mobilization of the diplomatic community, and the Bureau has already targeted, convening a meeting with the E10 of the Security Council to sensitize them on the question of Palestine and the status of the situation, in the occupied Palestinian territory. We will also commemorate the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people in November, as well as the commemoration of the Nakba, which was mandated in the last General Assembly resolution. Section B is to raise awareness on the question of Palestine, including through the website of the committee, the UNISPAL website, as well as convening committee conferences, events, as well as issuing of publications and activities, on social media to convey messages and raising key issues on the question of Palestine. Subsection C highlights the committee's cooperation with intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, interparliamentary organizations, as well as the United Nations system entities, including rapporteurs and independent commissions working on the subject matter. Finally, subsection D informs about the planned capacity development program for the staff of the government of State of Palestine. And lastly, and by no means the least, section 3 refers to the practice of regularly reviewing and assessing and adjusting the program's activities. In short, the program of work was crafted to enable greater flexibility during the implementation of the program, as well as to accommodate activities related to the fast evolving events on the ground. Mr. Chair, I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrice. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we count on your continued engagement for the successful implementation of the committee's program of work and its mandate. I now open the floor for any comments you may have before we adopt the draft. Is there any comments? If no, the draft is adopted. It is so decided. As this is the first committee meeting since November 2024, I would like to express my gratitude to committee members and partners for their strong support during the observance of 2024 International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. I would like also to highlight the exhibit Gaza Palestine, a crisis of unity and a cry for justice, which is our committee displayed at UN headquarters with those areas. This powerful exhibition is now available online, ensuring continued access to its important message. Before we proceed to agenda item 9, other business, I would like to inform you about recent and upcoming activities of the committee. But this has been done. Thank you very much. I would like to inform you that the Bureau will hold a major stakeout outside the ECOSOC chamber at just after the closing of this meeting. Let me conclude by informing that all statements delivered today will be available on the UNIPSAL website, which offers the widest collection of documents on the question of Palestine in different languages, including those prepared by the Division for the Palestinian Rights, monthly bulletins, weekly NGO action news, annual compilations of United Nations resolution and report. Are there any other matters to be raised, dear colleague, distinguished delegate? I don't see. If there are no other matters to be discussed, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.